Have you ever looked up to the sky in the middle of your pain and asked, "Lord, why me?" It's an ancient question, asked by prophets, kings, saints, and also by simple people like you and me. Suffering, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, always carries with it a silence that seems to scream inside the chest. The Bible does not shy away from this question. On the contrary, it places it at the very center of the story of salvation. Think of Job, a righteous man who lost everything: family, health, possessions. He cried out, "Why was I born? Why live if life is only pain?" Job 3:11. That voice echoes through the centuries and still resounds today. When someone cries alone in their room, when a hospital is filled with sighs, when a mother buries her child. But here lies the mystery. Even without understanding, Job did not turn away from God. He remained in dialogue, even if it was a dialogue of tears. This teaches us that suffering is not the absence of God, but it can be the very space where He meets us more closely. And maybe you listening today are living something like this. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you're fighting a disease. Maybe you carry hidden wounds no one imagines. Deep down, the question is the same. Why does God allow me to suffer? Don't expect a simple answer, because suffering cannot fit into formulas. It is too deep. But one thing we can affirm: God does not ignore our pain. When Jesus wept at the death of Lazarus, John 11:35, He showed that even the Son of God is moved by human suffering. He did not come to give us cold explanations, but to embrace our tears with His own. And here I want to open space with you. Write in the comments what you think about this. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Have you felt God in the midst of pain? Share it, because your words may be the comfort for another person who is also watching now. And if you've come this far, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Not just to follow the next videos, but to walk together on this road of faith. Here, each video is like a candle lit in the middle of the night, illuminating not only your life, but also the life of those still searching for hope. In the next step of this journey, we will look at the cross. Because if there is a place where the question, "Why does God allow suffering?" gains a new dimension, that place is Calvary. There, the beloved Son was not spared. There, heaven seemed to close. But was it really the end? Or was something hidden there that only the eyes of faith can see? At the heart of the Christian faith is the cross. Not a golden, ornamental cross, but that rough wooden one, stained with blood and sweat. There, Jesus, the beloved Son, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matt 27:46. Notice, the very Son of God asked the same question that so often echoes in our lives. This means that the question, "Why does God allow suffering?" is not a sign of weakness, but part of the journey of faith. The cross is the place where God's silence seems most deafening. The disciples were confused, Mary wept, the sky darkened. Everything pointed to defeat. And yet, it is there that the mystery begins to unfold. God did not abolish suffering, He took it upon Himself. The suffering that seemed meaningless gained new significance. On the cross, Jesus did not explain why we suffer, but showed that we are never alone when we suffer. He entered into our pain to transform it from within. It is like a fire that burns not to destroy, but to purify. How many times do we also look at our daily crosses, losses, illnesses, loneliness, failures, and think it is the end? But the cross teaches us that the end can actually be the beginning of something greater. The resurrection did not come in spite of the cross, but through it. Maybe today you are living your own Good Friday. Maybe you feel the weight of a cross that seems unbearable. But remember, on Calvary's Hill, it looked like everything was lost, and yet it was there that God accomplished the greatest victory. Suffering, when united with Christ, can be the doorway to resurrection. And I want to hear from you. What does the cross mean in your life? Has there ever been a moment when, in the midst of pain, you felt God at your side? Write it in the comments. Your testimony can be a beacon for someone who feels they are in the dark. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take the opportunity now. Not out of obligation, but because here we walk together as brothers and sisters in faith. Each subscription is like another voice joining to say, we are not alone. But we will not stop here. Because if the cross reveals the mystery of suffering, it also leads us to an even deeper question. What about when God seems not to answer? God's silence can be even more painful than the pain itself. In the next step, we will dive into this silence and discover how He speaks even when He seems to be quiet. Perhaps one of the greatest pains of the soul is not just to suffer, but to feel that God is silent. Have you ever lived that? Prayers that seem not to go beyond the ceiling, requests repeated night after night, and nothing changes. That silence of God weighs heavily, and many even come to think, has He forgotten me? The Bible does not ignore this mystery. The Psalms are full of cries. How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever? Psalms 13:1. Even the saints felt this absence. Saint Teresa of Calcutta, known as Mother Teresa, wrote in her letters that for many years she did not feel God's presence in her prayers. And yet she continued to love, to serve, to give herself. God's silence is not rejection, but invitation. It is like the night that prepares the sunrise. He invites us to a deeper faith, one that does not depend on immediate signs, but on trust. When Jesus slept in the boat while the disciples faced the storm, Mark 4:38, it seemed like He didn't care. But when He awoke, He showed He was in control all along. Sometimes God's silence is the pedagogy of love. He teaches us not to confuse faith with emotion. Faith is not about feeling. Faith is about remaining. Even when the heart does not perceive it, grace continues to act. Like the root of a tree that grows hidden in the soil, preparing new life that cannot yet be seen. And maybe this is the stage you are living now. You don't see a way out, you don't feel answers, and you even doubt if God is there. But let me tell you, God's silence is often proof that He trusts you. He trusts that your faith can mature, that you can take steps without needing immediate explanations. I want to hear from you. Have you ever gone through God's silence? How was it? Write in the comments, because your experience can bring light to another life that today feels the same pain. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. Not because it's just another click, but because each time someone subscribes, this message reaches more people who are in need of hope. You can be God's instrument to bring comfort to those who weep. But we won't stop here, because there is still a greater question. If God is love, how can suffering become part of His plan? In the next step, we will dive into this mystery, looking at the saints and the very history of the Church, which shows us how pain can be transformed into a source of life. If we look at the history of the Church, we will see that the greatest fruits of holiness often sprang from the soil of pain. Think of Saint Padre Pio, who bore in his very body the stigmata of Christ. His life was marked by physical sufferings and unjust persecutions, but from those sufferings came miracles and conversions. Pain, united with the cross of Christ, became a channel of grace for thousands of people. Another example is Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. She lived only 24 years, but her physical frailty and illnesses did not prevent her from leaving behind a spirituality so profound that she was proclaimed a doctor of the church. In the silence of the convent, offering her small sufferings, she taught us that pain can be transformed into love. The saints did not seek suffering for its own sake, but embraced it as an opportunity for union with Christ. This is the secret. Suffering, when offered, ceases to be a useless burden and becomes a living prayer. It is like bitter water that, when it touches the cross, is transformed into a sweet source of life. And this logic is not confined to the past. How many men and women, anonymous, today offer their sufferings in silence? Mothers praying for distant children, the sick uniting their tears with Christ's, people who, even amid losses, continue to trust in God. These silent testimonies are seeds that blossom in eternity. This does not mean romanticizing pain, but recognizing that it can be fruitful. Suffering is not good in itself, but it can generate good when united with love. It is like the seed that must die in order to bear fruit. Jesus himself said, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." John 12:24. And you, have you ever lived through, or do you know someone who transformed pain into life? Share it in the comments. Your testimony can inspire those who today see only darkness. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, be part of this community. Here we don't speak of pain to increase wounds, but to show how even in suffering, God writes stories of hope. Your subscription helps more hearts discover this truth. But there is still one final step to take. Because we have spoken of Job, of the cross, of God's silence, of the saints. But the initial question still echoes. Why does God allow suffering? In the last block, we will close this cycle and reveal how this question finds its answer not in theories, but in a presence, the presence of a God who walks with us. We have arrived at the deepest point of our journey. From the very beginning, we have carried the same question. Why does God allow suffering? We looked at Job, who did not give up even through tears. We went to Calvary, where Jesus himself asked the question. We entered God's silence, saw saints and ordinary people turning pain into life. And now, faced with all of this, what is the answer? The truth is that we may never have a complete explanation in this life. But Christianity does not only give us answers, it gives us a presence. God did not leave us alone in pain. He himself entered it in Jesus Christ. He did not stay distant, watching from afar. He became flesh, wept, suffered, died, and rose again. This changes everything, because it means that every tear of yours has already been touched by Him. Every pain you feel has already been embraced by Him. When you ask, "Lord, why do I suffer?" the answer does not come in ready-made phrases, but in an embrace that sustains. Suffering remains a mystery, but it is no longer absurd. It can be a path, not because God wants our pain, but because He knows how to transform it into something greater. Like gold tested in fire, the soul that trusts amid suffering emerges stronger, purer, more like Christ. The Apostle Paul wrote, "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him." Rome 8:28. It does not mean that everything is good, but that even what seems evil can be transformed by God into blessing. And here I return to you. How did this reflection touch your heart? Do you believe God can transform your suffering into new life? Write it in the comments. I really want to hear your view, because your sharing may be the very answer another person is asking God for today in prayer. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is the moment. It's not just about following videos. It's about being part of a community that believes that not even pain is greater than God's love. Each subscription helps spread this message of hope to more hearts. We finish this video, but we do not finish the journey, because life will continue to bring questions, pains, and mysteries. But now you know, you do not walk alone. At every step, there is a God who transforms cross into resurrection, tears into comfort, silence into presence. And maybe this is the great secret. God allows suffering not because He rejoices in pain, but because there, in the weakest point, He reveals Himself as strength, as love that never abandons. It is in that space that we discover, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. PS 23:4.